Maintenance dredging is all about placement at the approved existing offshore marine DMPA, just to clarify. So, a bit of the overview. We can go again in modelling framework, again just briefly, the difference between maintenance capital, some of the model outputs and key findings, and some of the water quality monitoring that WBM and AINS have been doing during maintenance dredge campaigns. So modelling framework, the same calibrated and validated 3D models that used for the capital dredging. So for the EIS, there's a lot of work going in to get this model robust and calibrated and validated. So we use the same one for the maintenance dredging. We modelled a maintenance dredging campaign of the expanded channel, which involved a little bit more, because it's a bigger channel, a bit more siltation, so a little bit more maintenance dredge volume per year, around about 14%. As I said, replacement of the existing DMPA, and that's, we modelled evenly spreading that across the dredge material replacement area. Now I think, talking to Melinda, that was a requirement. I think that's changing. They can actually preferentially place in deeper waters, which will reduce the resuspension from that DMPA, if that's right, yeah. As per GRUMPA guidelines, again, we did the 12-month resuspension modelling following placement of that material at the DMPA. So when you were talking about this, there's really three impacting pathways. There's the plumes from the dredge. So when it's dredging, the overflow, the plumes from the dredge head, and then when that settles on the bottom, that's available for resuspension. So that's the first pathway. The second one is plumes from placement at the DMPA. So when the dredge goes out there and it places the material, there's plumes, surface plumes which go in the water. And then when the material hits the bottom, there's some secondary plumes which go along the bottom. And then the third one is the long-term resuspension. So once that material's placed there, the dredge goes and disappears off to Cairns or wherever. There's every storm event, wind event comes through, potential to resuspend that. So there's that long-term 12 months and more resuspension. Now, GRUMPA guidelines say we need to look at 12 months of resuspension modelling from there. So that's what we do. All right, another animation here. This is, if it works, this is an animation of the actual maintenance dredging, and if it works, you'll see the dredging of the Platypus channel and then placement out at the DMPA here. So you can see here, when it places, there's a small surface plume which disappears pretty quickly. But the general direction is this way or that way, just because of prevailing weather conditions. Okay, some of the model outputs. So we've got ambient on top. Now we've got the 95th percentile on the left here, and this is the 50th percentile. So this is during rough conditions, high winds. This is during average conditions. And we assess that. So down the bottom is the maintenance dredging during that 95th percentile. So this is the acute short, sharp peaks in turbidity. So that's what we're seeing there. Now the scales are a little bit different on these two, which is why this 50th percentile looks bigger. If the scales were the same, this one would look smaller. We just do that so that we actually can see where the plumes go. So you can see the dredge plumes here when it's maintenance dredging. It's mostly around the Platypus channel. There's not much maintenance dredging in the sea channel. I think they've done it once, possibly. Because it's a lot deeper out there, there's not as much maintenance dredging required. So it's really concentrating in the Platypus channel here, and also the inner and outer harbours there. And then during this, with the scale difference, it's sort of, you can see where it comes along the strand and up to Cape Pallarenda. So we also looked at sediment deposition after each maintenance dredge run. So the top one is deposition rate. You can see GRUMPA guidelines is a 3 milligrams per cubic centimetre per day, and that's a mean annual, so that's over an average over the whole year. And then they've got a daily maximum value of 15 milligrams, and that's to look at those peaks, those acute impacts of sediment deposition. And you can see during the modelling, maintenance modelling, we're getting sediment deposition somewhere around about, it's a bit hard to tell, somewhere probably around here. But it's sort of contained around the channel and also the DMPA out there.
Right, just where is here, they can't see.
Yeah, what are those numbers?
Oh, sorry. It's around about, I'm a bit colourblind, so it's a bit hard to tell, but it's around about 6 to 7, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so 5.5 to 6.5.
Yeah. So it's a little bit above the mean annual, but maintenance dredging is only occurring for about 4 to 6 weeks per year, so you're getting that short, sharp hit, I guess, for 5 or 6 weeks. But if you take a mean annual, then that'll be a lot lower. And then it's a lot lower. The 15 is not even on the scale here, so it's a lot lower than the daily max. The bottom plot's just the final deposition. So this is just at the end of the model run. This is where everything's sitting. And again, around the DMPA and then along the channel and in the harbour. And that scale there is, I can't even read it. It's about 250, I think,
Right.
milligrams per centimetre.
200.
200. which doesn't, yeah. Yeah, that's it. So similar to the capital dredging, we did the zones of impact on the maintenance dredging. And this is the zone of impact figure. So we've got a map of the sensitive receptors. So this is all the seagrass areas, all the known historical mapped seagrass areas. So these come and go with the years, as you know, but this is a lot over this side. There's around Cape Pellerin and through there, and then the bottom of, or eastern side of Maggie Island. And then we've got the corals mapped on there as well, Middle Reef, and then the ones along the coast and around the top there. So what this is showing, I didn't have much time to go into before for the capital dredging, but these are the zones of impact. So this one here, going around there, is the zone of influence, and there's also a little one out at the DMPA, and that's detectable plumes, which are about one NTU. So it's what an instrument could actually measure, but it's really, as far as the thresholds go, it's not going to have an impact on corals and seagrass. It's why we're seeing it just around this area. So it's restricted to the channel. The zone of influence really, from maintenance dredging, from our modelling, is coming around the bottom of the island. It's not going into Jeffrey Bay or Florence Bay or further up north. It's kicking around the corner there. Yeah, I know. So we've also done, for the Port of Townsville, separately have asked us over the years to do further assessments of maintenance dredging for the 10-year permit and a few other instances. So we've taken existing maintenance campaigns, we've modelled those with the same model, and for this one we ran it over, the regulators wanted to see different weather periods. So we did an El Nino year, a La Nina year, and a transitional year. So we ran over these different weather periods just to see, okay, it's great that you model that year, but is it representative? What about if you model it during different conditions? So we modelled over the range of years. And we sort of found similar findings to what we include in the EIS with the little bit of additional maintenance material. It's basically the zone of low impact just around that bend. Zone of influence for this one extends a little bit further around because I think there was more resuspension modelling in this one. It went for a longer period. And you can see that they're from the DMPA here, when they place material there, from the southern extent where it's shallower, you get, over 12 months, you get it gradually, you get plumes. Now, this is still the zone of influence. It's detectable plumes, but it's not causing any known discernible impacts. But this one's travelling down through an El Nino year, it's coming down this way. Through a La Nina year, it's heading more towards the bottom of Maggie Island. And through the transitional year, it's fairly similar to the El Nino. And then those plumes sort of kick around Cape Pellerin and then around the coast there. So there's a couple of slides here on water quality monitoring. Now this is for the EIS, we put out those 12 months of data, and as it happened, there was some dredging periods. There was a capital dredging period in there, and then there was some maintenance dredging periods as well, which on these graphs, so these graphs are turbidity time series of Picnic Bay, Florence Bay and Jeffrey Bay. And these shaded areas are showing the the dredging. So the dark is capital dredging and the lighter grey is maintenance dredging. So what we sort of see here is that if you look at the whole period, you don't see any really noticeable spikes during dredging period compared to the rest of when there's no dredging happening. But we did find some spikes in the data which are similar across all 3 monitoring sites. Every time there was maintenance dredging, there was a kick of turbidity spikes going up in those graphs, which you can just see. So we went to the port and we said, this is what we're seeing. And they had a look at the records, and what we revised, what they found was that during this dredging period, when they're doing the capital dredging, when the winds picked up, they switched over to maintenance dredging. So these spikes were coincident with sort of rougher weather and windier weather. So we don't know, we think it's from the winds, but it's hard to tell. It sort of complicated things. So what we got here, the year after, AIMS has been out there monitoring similar things at similar locations. And we got their data in 2014. So there was another maintenance dredging period during this. When we did this, we only had Florence Bay and Cleveland Bay. So we had Maggie Island, and then we had over the eastern side of Cleveland Bay. And then we had wind data with this. So AIMS gave us the wind data and they gave us the turbidity data. So we had a look at the winds, and these spikes in the winds were east-southeast winds, and you get a spike in turbidity as well outside of dredging. And then this is the maintenance dredging period here. You get these winds, you don't get much turbidity, but then we got these big spikes happening at both Cleveland Bay, eastern Cleveland Bay and Florence Bay. And that was coincidence with when these southeast winds picked up, it really spiked the turbidity up at both sites. Now we don't know what the contribution of maintenance dredging material is to those spikes. Could all be natural material, could be some dredge material, which follows into my next slide here. So part of the maintenance dredging was that we modelled the ambient turbidity and the dredge turbidity, and we extracted time series plots out of the model at certain locations. So the one on the left is Jeffrey Bay and the one on the right is Picnic Bay. So this is a time series. The maintenance dredging model starts at Jeffrey Bay, Picnic Bay. You're not seeing much, you're seeing a little bit of ambient turbidity. The winds really pick up and kick up, and you find the blue line is natural ambient material. The red line down here is dredge sediment from the maintenance dredge. So you're finding at Jeffrey Bay, Picnic Bay, you're finding these big spikes up to about 30 NTU, and you're getting some signature of the maintenance dredge material, but it's around about, it's a relatively small contribution to that total turbidity. So this was interesting for us to see that those spikes in the previous slide, if we go back, that sort of indicates that these spikes here would be mostly natural sediment, especially this one here. This is eastern Cleveland Bay. So the winds are southeast, so it's pushing the dredge material away from it, so that's mostly natural. Yeah. So a couple of slides on maintenance dredge findings. So we found that the change in turbidity due to dredging at sensitive receptor locations is predicted to be maintained or remain within the range of natural variability. So we had the zone of influence, but we didn't have any zones of impact from maintenance dredging. Combined with that, there was a likely low risk of impact due to the short-term nature of dredge plumes. So those maintenance dredges are only there for about 5 or 6 weeks. Seagrass, corals and stuff can handle, as Ross was saying, they can handle these periods of increased turbidity for that time frame. So that added or supported the low risk of impacts. We found that the findings from the 1993 capital dredging campaign, which some of you were involved with here, Larkham Red, Peter's gone, but they found that during that 11-week campaign they did the reactive monitoring program, The dredge-related effects appear to lie within normal variation of seagrass sites in southeast Cleveland Bay and the coral systems at Middle Reef. So they didn't, during a similar campaign, they didn't find any impacts to corals and seagrass. Sedimentation is predicted to be limited to the channel areas in the DMPA, as those plots showed. So it was really negligible to low impacts of sensitive receptors, especially in terms of the corals. As Ross was talking about before, the sedimentation is really what affects the corals. We looked at the cumulative impacts question came up previously. We looked at that for maintenance dredging. Capital dredging, not so much from our perspective because it was a one-off event, whereas maintenance dredging is happening year after year. So we really wanted to have a look at those cumulative effects of what's left in the system at the end of the year when the dredge comes back again. And it all came down to that relative contribution of dredge sediment to the overall sedimentation in Cleveland Bay, as Peter Ridd was talking about, and our modelling sort of suggested as well, was fairly low. So we sort of come to the conclusion that cumulative impacts are not expected on water quality and marine habitats that are currently in poor recovering conditions. So even if those marine habitats are in poor condition, even though that's a contentious issue, we're not sure where the tipping point is, but we think that the additional sediment, what our modelling is showing, the additional sediment from maintenance dredging is not adding too much to the system.